So what can you do if you have a behavior that you want to get rid of? Well, one technique you can use is extinction. And extinction is what, hey, wait a second. No! Woo! That was close. Extinction is a powerful technique. And if you want to know how it works, then this is the video for you because I am Dr. Igor Yudichevich, and this is behavior modification. Let's go. All right, so today we're going to talk about extinction. And extinction is one of the ways that we can reduce and eventually, hopefully, get rid of an unwanted behavior. So extinction occurs when reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior is discontinued, and then that leads to a decrease in that behavior over time. So notice that one of the key features of extinction is that it occurs for a previously reinforced behavior. So when you remove reinforcement for a behavior that was previously reinforced. So if you're a little unclear about what reinforcement is and how it actually works, I urge you go back, do a refresher on extinction. We got a few videos here. So if you want to know a basic overview of reinforcement and how to use it effectively, check out this video, link in the description. If you want a refresher on what negative reinforcement is, which is one that is misused in mainstream society all the time, you can check out this video here, link in the description. We will be talking a little bit about intermittent schedules of reinforcement. So if you want to know about their effects on behavior, check out this video right here, link in the description. And then finally, what are the effects of those intermittent schedules of reinforcement on behavior? If you want to learn about this really pretty scalloped curve, behavior curve, check out this video. Again, link in the description. So once you got yourself a firm foundation of what reinforcement is and how it works, now we're ready to see what happens when you remove that reinforcement in a technique called extinction. So to get our working definition of extinction, we're going to go back to Skinner. We've been visiting Skinner a lot, and that's because a lot of these fundamental ideas that we're going over were first introduced and discovered by Skinner. So we're once again going back to his book on science and human behavior. And this time we're going to go to the chapter on operant behavior, and we are going to use his definition of extinction as our working definition today. And what Skinner said was that when reinforcement is no longer forthcoming, a response becomes less and less frequent in what is called operant extinction. So this has all the key components to keep in mind when we're talking about extinction. So first of all, we have when reinforcement is no longer forthcoming. So extinction only happens on a behavior that was previously reinforced. Any behavior that was not previously reinforced cannot technically go through extinction because it is when previously reinforced behavior no longer receives reinforcement. And the effect of that is that behavior becomes less and less frequent. And that reduction in the frequency of a behavior, once reinforcement is no longer delivered, that is what we refer to as extinction. Now, I've kind of hammered on these little points often just in the short intro to this video. And one of the reasons is because extinction is oftentimes misused. The term extinction is oftentimes misused. So we want to make sure we're using it correctly so that if we talk to a behavior analyst, we don't end up in this situation where we say something and then we regret it because we were using a term incorrectly. So what are those common misuses of extinction? We'll go over them just to make sure that this never happens to you. So one common misuse of extinction is that a behavior was extinguished when it was just reduced by either punishment or reinforcement for another behavior. So it's not because the reinforcement was removed, it was decreased. So it looks like extinction because the behavior was decreased, but the cause was either punishment or reinforcement of an alternative behavior, and that is not extinction. So we would not want to call that extinction. That's either punishment or what we're going to see in a future video, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Another misuse of extinction is if you confuse extinction with forgetting. Sometimes a behavior just weakens because you forget about it due to the passage of time. Extinction is when that behavior weakens because reinforcement is withheld. Forgetting is when it weakens because it was just the passage of time without any sort of consequences being withheld. So that is not extinction. You don't want to say that that's extinction. That doesn't actually constitute what extinction is. All right, next common misuse of extinction. Confusing response blocking with extinction. And this one is probably the biggest confusion between extinction and some other form of behavior reduction. So in extinction, the reinforcement is removed, but importantly, the behavior can still occur. It's just that it's no longer reinforced. In response blocking, you physically prevent the behavior. So the behavior can no longer occur. So in response blocking, the behavior goes down, but it goes down now because it's impossible to perform. So it's not extinction, it's a different form of behavior reduction. So to give you an example to illustrate this, because this can sometimes get a little bit confusing, let's say that you have a child and they are continually playing with a light switch. They're just turning it off, turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off, turning it on. And that can get annoying, much like that little turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on can also get annoying. So anyways, let's say that you want to reduce that behavior. If you still allow the light flicking behavior to occur, this light switch flick to occur, but you remove the reinforcement by, for example, unscrewing the light bulb a little bit so that the connection is no longer there. Now the light switch can go up and down, but nothing happens to the light. In that case, the behavior can still occur, but is no longer being reinforced by that on and off of the light bulb. That is extinction. If, on the other hand, you actually block the behavior of switching on the light, flicking the switch up and off, that is response blocking. So if, for example, you put some duct tape over that light switch, that light switching behavior will decrease and it'll look like extinction, but it's not extinction because you've actually physically blocked or physically prevented the behavior. So it's very important to keep those two distinct because there are distinct techniques, distinct consequences of those. So again, extinction is when the behavior can still occur. You can still flick the light switch, but the reinforcement is not delivered. The light bulb doesn't go on and off. Response blocking is when you physically prevent the behavior. You duct tape over the light switch, so the light switch behavior can't occur, and the light still doesn't go on and off, but now because the behavior cannot occur. So response blocking may look like extinction, but no, it is not extinction. So do not use that incorrectly. And then finally, the last common misuse of extinction is when you confuse non-contingent reinforcement with extinction. And non-contingent reinforcement is basically exactly what it says on the tin. It's when a reinforcer is delivered, but it's not based on the performance of any target behavior. And this is often done to provide reinforcement independent of a problem behavior to reduce the motivation for that problem behavior. So if a child throws a tantrum because they want a cookie, in order to reduce the motivation for those tantrums, you might give the child a cookie, not after they throw a tantrum, but just at random intervals, right? So that their desire for that cookie is satisfied and they don't have to throw the tantrum. So again, the tantrum is reduced, but now it's not reduced because reinforcement was withheld. It's now reduced because reinforcement is non-contingent. It's just given at random intervals. So non-contingent reinforcement also not an example of extinction. So these are all confused sometimes because the behavior is being decreased. But remember that extinction is specifically when a behavior is decreased by removing a previously reinforced reinforcer. By removing the reinforcer after the behavior, that is what is reduced. That is extinction. All right, so what we're going to take a look at now is we're going to take a look at types of extinction, and we're going to split these up based on the function of the behavior. So this is useful because extinction procedures, when you're trying to reduce a particular behavior, you should tailor that to the function of the behavior for maximum extinction effectiveness. So the three major functions of behavior that are affected by extinction are positive reinforcement. So whether the previously reinforced behavior was maintained by positive reinforcement, Other one, was it maintained by negative reinforcement, or is it maintained by automatic reinforcement? Those are the three major types of extinction based on that function of behavior. So let's take a look first at extinction of behavior maintained by positive reinforcement. So this is case number one. So extinction of behavior that is maintained by positive reinforcement is also sometimes known as attention extinction, simply because attention is often the most common positive reinforcement that is maintaining some of these problem behaviors. So this is when a behavior has been reinforced by positive reinforcement, oftentimes social attention, and then extinction involves removing of that reinforcement, the removing of, for example, attention as a consequence for the behavior. So, for example, if you are a teacher in a class and you have a student that always shouts out the answers in class, they don't put up their hand, they just shout out the answer. You want to reduce that problem behavior. So if they shout out the answer, then what you do is you call on another student. You ignore them. You do not reinforce the behavior. You remove that reinforcement. They don't get that attention, and you call on another student, and those shout outs will decrease. Another example, let's say that you are a parent and you have a child and you're trying to teach them how to do an alphabet puzzle, but they just keep throwing the letters on the ground. In this case, what you would want to do is you would want to stay neutral and only engage when the child plays appropriately. So don't reinforce the throwing behavior with attention, with bringing the toy back, the puzzle piece back. You want to ignore that behavior, remove that reinforcement. Don't bring the toy back. Don't give the child that social attention, and only engage with attention when the child plays appropriately, putting the pieces in the correct slots. Now, a real brief aside with this does not mean that you can never be goofy with children. You can never just play around. You can never be silly. You can never just kind of go with the flow. However, always be aware of the behavior that you want to reduce and why you want to reduce them. So if you're fine with your child being goofy and throwing letters on the floor, by all means, pick those letters up. They'll throw them again. Pick them up. They'll throw them again. If that's a behavior that you encourage, no need for it to go through extinction. However, once a behavior becomes a problem behavior, then this is one of the avenues that you can use to decrease that problem behavior. You can go through extinction and thereby reduce that problem behavior. All right, so important considerations when you go through extinction, important considerations when you are using extinction for positive reinforced behaviors. Number one, extinction bursts are going to be very, very common. So an extinction burst is where the behavior increases once extinction procedures are put into place. So this is an extremely common occurrence. So if you're trying to stop your child from throwing the letters on the floor, and that was previously reinforced with social attention, now that you remove that reinforcement, you better get ready for all of those letters to go onto the floor multiple times. That's an extinction burst, more letter throwing than ever before. That's just a consequence of extinction, and it actually is a good sign because it means the extinction is working, but you need to be ready for it because it looks like failure, right? The problem's gotten worse, but in reality, it's just a procedure. It's just what happens with extinction. Get ready for that extinction burst. Spontaneous recovery, another consideration. Spontaneous recovery, where the behavior reoccurs briefly after extinction, also occurs. So you might think that you have solved your child's letter throwing problem behavior because they don't throw the letters anymore. And then one day you start playing with them again and there goes a letter onto the floor. That's just spontaneous recovery. Be prepared for it. It's not a step back. It's just part of the extinction process. And then lastly, you want to combine extinction with reinforcement and reinforcement for those alternative behaviors. So again, in this example, as I mentioned, you don't want to reinforce the letter throwing, but you definitely want to reinforce the placing the letters into the correct slots. So don't just pull away the social attention when they do the problem behavior for the extinction, but pair that with additional reinforcement for a target behavior when they do that correctly. All right. Next, number two, extinction of a behavior maintained by negative reinforcement. So extinction of a behavior maintained by negative reinforcement, also known as escape extinction. And this is where a behavior has been reinforced, oftentimes because that behavior allowed somebody to avoid or escape from a task. So in this case, if you're going through the extinction procedure, you cannot reinforce. You got to stop that reinforcement by not allowing the individual to escape or avoid from the task. You have to make sure that that individual has to engage in the behavior that they previously used this problem behavior to avoid. So for example, let's say that you have, again, we'll stick with a child example. Let's say that you have a child that refuses to eat their vegetables and they just sulk at the table. They won't engage in conversation. They'll just stare at their plate. They won't answer you. They won't talk to you. They're giving you the silent treatment. And in the past, when they did this, there came a point where you would just take the vegetables away and you'll say, fine, you don't want to eat them. You don't have to eat them. That is negative reinforcement. That is taking away something they were able to escape and avoid the task of eating their vegetables. And then that sulking behavior, which caused the takeaway of the vegetables, increased. So that is negative, taking something away, reinforcement, the sulking behavior increased. So what do you do in this case? Well, you remove that negative reinforcement. You don't take the vegetables away, and you require that the person engage in the behavior until they do the behavior. So they stay at the table, they have to eat the vegetables, and they're not allowed to leave until they finish the vegetables. And then that sulking behavior will decrease because it's no longer being reinforced with them being able to avoid eating the vegetables. Similarly, let's say that you are trying to get a child to do some worksheets. You're trying to get them to practice some academic task. And every single time you do that, they just throw the worksheet onto the table, onto the floor. They just take the pages and toss them onto the floor. If they were able to avoid doing the worksheet previously by throwing it on the floor, then this would have been negative reinforcement. If you said, all right, fine, you threw it on the floor, let's just not do this. Clearly, you're not interested. Then what you have done is you have negatively reinforced that behavior. You have taken away the task, saying you don't have to do the worksheets because they threw it on the floor. So throwing it on the floor is going to increase. The way that you decrease that is that the next time they throw it on the floor, you do not let them escape. You do not let them avoid the situation. You don't negatively reinforce it. You very calmly pick the pages off the floor, give it back to them, and make sure that they do the work. And if they throw it again, calmly pick it up off the floor, give it back to them. And that actually leads into one of these important considerations for escape extinction is that, again, you can have this extinction burst. You can get an increase in the problem behaviors initially. So that child at the dinner table might sulk for hours now, right? That child with the worksheet might throw the worksheet on the floor multiple times. That, again, can be very frustrating unless you keep in mind that that means that the extinction procedure is actually working. They're actually going through the process, and that problem behavior will eventually decrease. Another consideration is that individuals might find new ways to escape. So keep that in mind as well. You might need to go through extinction for other behaviors, and you might have to be ready not to reward other behaviors. So that sulking child might actually start yelling at their parents, trying to escape eating the vegetables. This child throwing worksheets on the floor might actually try to run for the door and elope from the room. So they might try to find other ways of escape. So just be prepared for those as well. And again, you always want to combine extinction with positive reinforcement to make it more effective. So reinforce when the child eats their vegetables with some positive reinforcement, with some social attention. Reinforce when the child starts working on the worksheet, again, with some positive reinforcement, social attention, and that will increase the effectiveness of that extinction. All right, and the last one is extinction of behavior maintained by an automatic reinforcer. And this one, number 3, is often called sensory extinction. And that is because the automatic reinforcer is oftentimes a sensory experience. So this is when a behavior is self-reinforcing. So the behavior itself causes the reinforcement. It's not contingent upon somebody else producing the reinforcer or removing something for reinforcement. It actually is the behavior itself that creates the reinforcement. So oftentimes this is a sensory behavior. So for example, scratching an itch, nobody has to deliver the relief to you. That is an automatic consequence of scratching that itch. So this one requires slightly different techniques. So for example, we saw the example of the child that was flicking the light switch. That is an example of an automatic reinforcement. You don't have to deliver the reinforcement. The light coming on and off is the reinforcement. So you can disconnect that switch in order to no longer produce that reinforcing effect, right? You don't tape over it. That's response blocking. But if you want to use extinction, you simply disconnect the light bulb, and now the light switch does nothing. Eventually, that light switch flicking behavior will decrease. Let's take a look at another example as well, though, just to illustrate some of the complexities of this. Let's say that a child is scratching their skin, and they're scratching their skin until it bleeds. Okay, so this is a perfect example of a behavior that is not a problem, scratching your skin, until it's done too much, until it becomes a problem. So if they're scratching their skin until it bleeds, again, this is a sensory reinforcement. It's an automatic reinforcement. So we go through sensory extinction, and we have to break that link between the behavior and the feeling of the sensation. So one thing that you can do is you can place soft gloves on their hands, tie it so that they can't get the gloves off, and that will reduce the sensation and take away the reinforcement from the scratching behavior. However, this one is one that kind of leads into that problem that we saw before with response blocking versus extinction. So is wearing gloves a response blocking, or is it extinction? Wearing really thin gloves, probably extinction, because you can still scratch, but you just don't get that sensation. But then you can imagine wearing thicker gloves, other ways of preventing that scratching from occurring, all the way up to, for example, don't do this, but just by way of example, putting a child in handcuffs so that they can't scratch their body. In that case, what you've done is you've now crossed over into response blocking. So some sensory extinction procedures can be controversial in the sense that, are they response blocking or are they extinction? So where does that line get crossed in between soft gloves and handcuffs? It's not always very clear where to draw the line. So it's also important to, once again, pair these extinction procedures, even on sensory extinction, with alternative activities. So provide them with appropriate activities that might give them that sensory stimulation that they might be looking for. So example, if they are flicking light switches on and off, maybe a video game would be a good way to reinforce that need for that sensory stimulation without the problem behavior of flicking on and off a light switch. For a scratching behavior, it might be a little bit more difficult to determine one of those, but always keep your eyes out for those behaviors that you can do, for those alternative behaviors that are good behaviors that will give the same sensory stimulation without the problem behavior occurring. All right, so that was our intro look to extinction. So today what we did is we defined what extinction was. We went through some common misuses of extinction so that going forward, you can be very confident that you are using extinction in the correct way. And we taught you not to confuse extinction with forgetting. Don't confuse response blocking with extinction. Don't confuse non-contingent reinforcement with extinction. And then we took a look at the three types of extinction based on the function of behavior: extinction maintained by positive reinforcement, extinction maintained by negative reinforcement, and also extinction maintained by automatic reinforcement, that sensory extinction. So next time, what we're going to be looking at is using extinction effectively. So now you know what it is. How do you use it to the best of your abilities? How do you optimize extinction so that you can help yourself, help others? We're going to take a look at all of that next time. But until then, stay frosty, stay functional, and go modify some behavior. All right, I'm going to get going. So what can you do if you want to get rid of a behavior?